Hey entrepreneurs, this week we're going to talk about why short intensity trumps long perseverance. So what I'm talking about here is the simple concept that you've probably heard of before. Something like the Pomodoro technique is a very common way that people use this concept, where you say, I'm going to work for 25 minutes of disciplined focus, and then I'm going to take a 5-minute break. You do that in like 4 cycles, and then you take a little bit of a longer break. And then what you try to do is actually increase the intensity that you bring to your work such that you actually work fewer hours during the week. And as a result, you rest more, so you come back more energized and enthusiastic about tackling those goals with even greater intensity the next time, because you start this positive loop of feedback of realizing that by reducing distractions and the sort of halfway checked in, halfway mind wandering approach to work, you don't get as many rewards and benefits out of your whole life as you would if you did focused, intense work for short periods of time. So we're going to talk about how do you get yourself to work with greater intensity by shrinking your work hours, possibly even shrinking your work week. Some people have found, for example, that in many different industries, if you reduce the work week from 5 down to 4 and you tell people, look, if you can accomplish the same amount in 4 hours as you do in 5, we're going to keep this schedule. Inevitably, what tends to happen is that the productivity actually goes up across the board. This has been studied in various different cultures, different countries, and across different industries. So let me tell you about some of the benefits of using this short intensity approach. One is that you're going to actually have more creativity, because if you're spending less time at work, that means you're exposing your mind to other stimulus like movies or taking a walk in nature and reading fictional books, things that might trigger better ideas when you're actually at work. Another thing is that you're going to find that you're much less prone to distractions if you have, say, a countdown timer on your desk for 25 minutes, and you know that that's the time allotted for this one task. That puts you into a state where you're far more likely to trigger a flow state, where you get more interested in the task and you're less likely to feel like, I need a break, I'm just going to go check to see what crypto is doing or what the stock market's doing or what the latest news was or who liked my post on Twitter. All of those distractions, you're far less prone to them if you know that you have plenty of time for that later and you have a very restricted time to work on what's right there in front of you. So let's talk about how and why this works. Because if you understand why this works, you're more likely to adopt this and actually use it. Okay, so here's the thing. It's all about attention control. Really productivity, whenever people use that term time management, it's sort of a misnomer, because you can't manage time. It passes, 24 hours pass for you just like it does for anyone else. What you can manage is your attention. So what we're talking about here, when we're talking about focused, intense sprints, is this idea that by reducing the total of time that you're forcing your mind to be in focused, disciplined execution mode, you're going to get more out of yourself during that time because of attention control. You're less likely to wander from task to task, getting to the end of the day and not sure what you spent your time on, because you're allocating very short sprints to accomplish very specific things. So that's another piece of why this tends to work. Another aspect of why this works is because of energy management. If any of you have followed me for long, you know that I preach this concept that I originally learned about 2 decades ago from Tony Schwartz and Jim Lair. They've done a lot of work with athletes and with executives and people in all different phases of peak performance. And what they found is that if you can oscillate back and forth between rest, recovery, and then pushing hard, you're going to be able to push yourself harder and outside of your comfort zone, and thus expanding your comfort zone. It's a key concept in my coaching that I try to encourage people to, instead of just approaching their work as I'm just going to do my best all day, instead to think of it as I'm going to push myself for a level of intensity that's beyond what I'm usually capable of, and you're expanding your capacity, right? Instead of just, a lot of people, what they do when they show up to any endeavor, whether it's in medicine or whether it's in sales, any job that you'd think people want to get continuously better at, the tendency is for people to make rapid improvement in the first year or so, maybe just a little bit longer than a year if you look at some of the research on this. And then we plateau, and you can go for a decade in a career without actually improving, because you have this sense of, I kind of made it, and you're not pushing yourself consciously outside of your comfort zone. So you're not growing and expanding your skills, and it's terrible. What a terrible waste. So part of the advantage here is energy management. If you push yourself to actually stretch beyond your capacity, you need to then go into a rest mode. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of people find that techniques like the Pomodoro method work. It's also why some people would rather do a 2-day sprint where they actually work harder and longer for 2 days and then take a day off and then do that again, another 2-day sprint. Why some people go for a 4-day work week instead of a 5 or 6-day work week. So energy management and attention management, that's the why of how this actually works. So let's go over a few tips if you want to try this out for yourself and start actually using this. First, you're going to want to break tasks down into smaller chunks. You're going to want to say, I'm going to try to accomplish this chunk in this amount of time. Now, a lot of my clients try this, and their question they come back to me with is, well, wait a minute, I don't know exactly how long this thing's going to take. This is a creative task. Like, this is a frequent thing I hear from copywriters, for example, or creatives who are working on, say, ad creatives or something where you're kind of waiting for the inspirational moment and you know it's done when it's done, and you can't quite define what that looks like beforehand. But what you can do in those circumstances is you can still break it down into a bite-sized chunk that might be not about it being finished, but about creating a finish line for yourself, which could be, I'm going to review, or I'm just going to make a list of the top 15 competitor pieces of ad copy. That could be one little chunk that you try to do in 25 minutes. Another chunk that you might say, oh, that's easy, that'll take me 7 minutes, or I'm going to delegate that to my assistant. That's step one. That should take 4 or 5 minutes. Delegate that appropriately. And then I still have plenty of time. What's the next chunk? It could be something as simple as, I'm going to write 3 really terrible headlines and then 5 ideas that spin off from that. And so again, what you're doing is it's arbitrary, right? And that's what a lot of people say. So my work doesn't fit into these little boxes that you want me to create with smaller chunks. Choose an arbitrary chunk because it still activates your brain in the same way as if that was a real deep, meaningful thing, instead of an arbitrary decision to say, I'm going to try to accomplish this in this much time. Here's why. What will happen is you'll start to use that concept of, that work expands to fill the time available for its completion, Parkinson's law. You're going to start to use that against itself, where you're actually creating a small container to be able to accomplish something. And it really does help if you grab something like, one of these timer cubes where, it has a time, and if you flip it up, it gives you 7 minutes. Or I have others that are, 30 minutes or 45 minutes. And I have these on my desk so that if I need to get something done, and I have that timer as a physical thing, even though, there's plenty of online URL-based things. I just don't want the distraction if necessary. If possible, I would rather have something sitting there on my desk because it keeps me in that mode of, this is a race. And so what I'm doing is I'm stretching my capacity, right? So it actually makes work more fun. It is more likely to pull you into a flow state because you get more engaged in something when you have a clear goal that's very clearly defined. So that's one tip for, actually using this. The other thing is, start small. Don't try to do your entire day of sprints. I challenge you to just do this for the first 90 minutes of your workday, even if that's checking in with team. If you can do, one of my favorite concepts is what I call reverse containment. That's where you take a bunch of your maintenance tasks, the recurring stuff you have to do every week or day to kind of just keep your business running, and you try to shrink that down into a list that's consolidated. And you say, I've got to check email, I have to respond to team members on Slack, I have to go check my numbers here. And what you try to do is race yourself to see if normally it took, time yourself the first time, and then see if you can shave off 10%, and then maybe another 2 or 3% until you get down to a number that you feel like, what, if I could just sustain that would buy me a lot of time. Every work week, I would have less of this feeling of this stuff is kind of taking away my time, is robbing me of my energy. And instead, you're increasing your energy to rise to the challenge of seeing how fast you can push through that list that you have also preferably documented for yourself, so that it takes less brain power creativity, and you can actually just focus on speed moving through that. And of course, you always want to be thinking delegation as well. If it's something that's repeatable and recurring, there's a good chance somebody could do some aspects of that for you. All right, let's talk about 2 obstacles that might stop you: procrastination and perfectionism. You might say, I'm going to wait until I finish this big task before I use Todd's idea. Or, today I don't feel like I'm at my highest energy, so maybe I won't start this, focus sprint thing. But that second one, let me tell you first, there's a tendency for us to wait until we feel just right whenever we're going to stretch ourselves to do something that's a little bit difficult. And that's a mistake, because that creates a cycle where you're always avoiding pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone, because it's rare that you feel at your peak. And if you're a person who has a slight atypical neurological tendency that we call ADHD, you are probably more prone to this. Interestingly enough, the research suggests that people with ADHD are more likely to be perfectionistic about waiting until they feel fully alert, fully in concentration mode, fully energized, fully caffeinated or whatever, before they're willing to really focus and do the most difficult types of focused tasks. So just watch out for that bias that we tend to have toward waiting until everything is just right before we start to grow and stretch ourselves. If we were trying to train you for a marathon, we wouldn't wait for those days when you feel at your peak. We would just be consistent at expanding your capacity gradually over time. And yeah, some days you're not going to make as much progress as others, but by creating a consistency and trying to stretch yourself a little bit, eventually averages out to a lot more progress than if you just waited for those days when you feel at your peak. And the last thing I want to say about this is just to celebrate small wins and pause to reflect on how this goes. Because if all you do is you try this strategy, what's very likely is you're going to gradually drift back to whatever your most ingrained habit is for your work. But if you have a little bit of a feedback cycle, which I've talked about in other videos about how you can shorten the feedback loop so that you become more aware of what you're doing and how it's affecting you, that is a very powerful way to keep your motivation high and prevent yourself from forgetting to follow through on a new habit or a new structure that you want to bring into your life. So remember, the benefit here is fewer hours working, which means more enriched and full life, more productivity because you're bringing greater creativity, greater focus, you're actually expanding your capacity. There's a lot of benefits to doing this. So your challenge this week is to pick one small way to just practice this, even if it's just for 90 minutes. And if you're already a pro at this, see if there's one thing that you can take out of this video that you could use to just slightly expand. If you can just improve 2 or 3% how you use this technique over the course of a year, that's going to yield a lot of meaningful results. Talk to you again soon.